So I'm going to introduce myself first and just say I'm Jeremy Cohen. I'm the producing artistic director of the Playwrights Center, and I use he, him pronouns. And you are?
Well, I'm Daniel Alexander Jones, and I'm very honored to be here. And I use he, him, or they, them.
Wonderful. I want to just say a few things quickly about Daniel. Daniel, as we were rolling out this program, sadly for you, so thank you for always saying yes, is one of the artists for me personally in my heart and my spirit and my artistic practice who I listen to and seek counsel from and seek inspiration from on a pretty regular basis, and who we have had the great fortune at the Playwrights Center of supporting over the last number of years in many different kinds of ways. And so it felt really important to me, Daniel, that you were the first of the people to kind of share your thoughts during this time with no pressure around it, but just to have a gentle conversation with a lot of grace around it. So thank you so much for being here. Daniel's body of work and plays include Blacklight, Bright Now Beyond, Phoenix Fabrique, and Clay Angels. Daniel is a Guggenheim Fellow and a Doris Duke artist and a professor of theater currently at Fordham University. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's an honor to be here. And that number of years at the Playwrights Center is 26. I first came to Playwrights Center in '94 as a Many Voices Fellow. So it's been a place that is a home place and, you know, ebbing and flowing over the years, but always a site of great power for so many of us. And so I thank you and everyone there at Playwrights Center for responding with such speed and intention to create these spaces where people can gather and commune if nothing else, to be able to commune with one another through this experience feels really powerful. So yeah, it's an honor to be here. And I remember before the remodel, you know, of the building, so. Yeah.
Oh, those good days, those good days. So I guess, Daniel, I've been, you know, I'm thinking kind of each week, each day, each hour of going through this moment, you know, together and on our own is sort of teaching us whole new ideas and understandings of maybe how our world actually works. And I think we spend a lot of energy fitting the world to us or us to the world and, you know, kind of doing that dance. And I certainly feel, I was talking with a colleague earlier today, I've just revealed about what infrastructure in my life has been in place that is now shifting altogether. In sort of my artistic practice, in my emotional practice, in my psychological health, mental health practice, in my family, home life, my work life, all of that sort of thing. And at the Playwrights Center, we spend a lot of time right now talking about how, as a service organization, which we are, this is actually an opportunity to really lean into that kind of musculature, that kind of sinewy, athletic, toned self that really great service organizations, of which there are so many doing so much important work right now, can do. And for us, it really has to do with, sure, of course, creating a space for artists to create work. That's always going to be critical and important. It's always, I think, for us that we're also looking at it in terms of our work as holistic, as thinking about the whole human first. We are generative artists. And so how we live and how we thrive and where we struggle and where we fall and where we rise, all of those things really matter in terms of how that work comes to bear, rather than just let's workshop a play. And so for us, this moment really has been thinking through our own infrastructure and purpose about how that holistic practice really works in our energy and our effort. It feels sort of more important, you know, now than ever. And at the same time, you know, we're humans ourselves on staff and everywhere else. And so we're beginning to face our own fears or our frailty or our hopes, our uncertainties. You know, the thing that we keep saying is we do know something. We actually do know something that we know very little. And that actually you can make decisions from that place. That actually is a place of however you come to it. Choosing to know and understand what we don't know and understand is actually that can be a place, even if it's porous, to kind of spring from in its own way. And I think today, in some ways, there's a desire and a yearning to kind of understand like where we all find hope and inspiration right now. And I think that as we're rolling out our programming, as you mentioned, some of it was very tactical things that we could be doing and talking about and working on right now. And I think for some people, that's actually like, please don't make me just be more emotional, like be more available. I actually want to work on seeing how something specific can unlock something else, and I think everyone has a different process. But I think a lot of these sessions are really focusing on how we're taking care of ourselves. What is the power of the theater artist? What is the power of the playwright? What is the power of the storyteller as we've known it throughout the ages, and kind of what this moment will tell us now. Mm-hmm. So I guess I maybe wanted to start off today by saying, like, in a time where we're kind of looking back for kind of reference and guide points, and also kind of searching ahead. And also because these are conversations you and I have had for years and years and years, what do you think artists can offer moments of our world like this?
Mm-hmm. That's a powerful introduction. And I also want to say there is someone hammering something outside here. So if you all hear hammering, life continues, right? As we have this conversation. I want to respond by going to, something. I picked a few things to read from today as anchors, and this feels like the best way to do this. I'm picking something that was one of the ancient Egyptian pyramid texts. So it's thousands of years old, and it's from a book that has been, throughout my adult life, the closest thing I have to a sacred text that I carry with me. And my copy is like, it's full of, I've carried it around since 1988. And it's called Awakening Osiris. It's a translation of the Egyptian book of Coming Forth by Day. We know it as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, by this incredible poet, Normandy Ellis. And so why I bring it up in response to your question of any of the things I chose, and there are 2 chapters in here that hopefully I'll read from today, but is that to remember that we are always, as artists, and I think of the people who inscribed the hieroglyphs that this is translated from as artists, right? We're always seeking to make meaning of the experiences that we have. And the meanings are things that are in some way transtemporal, like they cross time. They are things that are available to us if we look for them. And there are things that I think in the heart of hearts, especially those of us who make work that is, work that we share with one another, like most of the folks in this call today are theater artists who are making something not for themselves and not for an insular audience, but they want to share these ideas. There are things that we hope are going to be testimonies that will cross time, right? We want them to endure because there's something that we've found through our life experience that we believe we can share that will be of value, right? So at this time when, and I think of it, we were talking with
Sorry.
That's good though. What was I going to say? That I'll even take that interruption as a good thing, like that we get a call we're not expecting. Like there's an interruption, right? And this is a moment of profound interruption that comes in the form of a slow-moving disaster. We are in a disaster. And this is not limited to the physical horror of there being a virus that is taking loved ones from all of our communities right now. It is also the idea that it's an undoing of a way of being and a way of thinking, and maybe for some people a way of not looking at the realities that we've been in. There's a revelation that comes with disaster always, and revelation can come through other kinds of epiphany too. Revelation can come when we fall in love. Revelation can come when someone is born into the world. Revelation can come when there's a major rite of passage in our journey. But revelation comes with disaster, when things fall apart. So I want to read this. This is the chapter, Becoming the Snake. The story goes that change is inevitable. So it must be that having eaten dust and rotting flesh, the snake comes to know in his own skin the secrets of change. Through the deceit of death, I grow wise in the illusions of time. I change. I grow beyond myself, leaving the papery sheath that once was what I was. I live alone and make my changes in secret. I know the smell of fear, of death, of innocence. I float among lilies. I rest in shadows. I lick the wisdom of air and dust. I know the earth, sky, and men. I wrap myself around the legs of life. By the enmity of others, I learn empathy with all creatures. I lie down in darkness and learn the art of subtlety. I rear and strike in surprise. I know the limits of earth. In my belly, I know this is all one place. I leave but a meandering trail in the dust, a graceful passage like the tracings of time. I lie down and change and rise and grow old and lie down and change and rise. I demand neither fear nor pity. I know what you cannot see. It is not pride that keeps me solitary. In your hands, the honey of my mouth turns to poison. It is mere survival, yours and mine. Change is eternity. The chapter ends. And so I think about that, you know, certainly I've been hearing so much from people who know and love Octavia Butler and Parable of the Sower, which Toshi Regan just adapted into this incredible performance. But God is change, this idea of the constancy of change. So this moment, we are all in a change. It is not a change of our choosing, but it is an ineluctable change. We can't walk away from it. We can't escape it. So I think that is the bed in which all of these questions and these experiences lie at this moment.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I will be, I think that this idea of falling apart in order to reform, or how hard we, I think especially Western culture, fight that falling apart, fight the release into the moment that you're in, is going to be very powerful right now in a way that our world and certainly this country hasn't felt it in a very long time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit more? I'm curious. You've shared with me both in working on different plays, but also in sort of the different pieces with Joe Mama. What has been your, like, do you have processes that are in terms of how this idea actually works, in terms of how things get built up and how they fall away, either in sort of a play like Duat or pieces with Joe Mama?
Part of it is, you know, that you know, I come to my work, as do many of us, from traditions. So the two of the traditions that are the rivers from which I come, one is sort of the Black American theatrical and cultural tradition, and then the other is the kind of like queer and queer POC art making and activism traditions, right? And in both of those traditions, it is because of the realities of history, it has always been about making within a context of uncertainty. And it has always been about making when resources are limited. It has always been about making when there is sudden change that you did not invite, right? It has always been about how do I respond to a moment of not only uncertainty, but often a moment of radical sudden change. And so I look at part in answer to you, like, how do I do it? Part of it is I always go back and I look. So I think of myself as like a trans-temporal cat. Like I like to go back and I also like to look forward, you know? So I try to hover up over the moment that I'm in for a minute and look across time as best I can. And so number one is to say, this particular moment we've never been in, and I think, you know, there's a lot of conversation that is rightful about, you know, because we're in a quote unquote global society now, and because of the advances in technology and travel, and because of the differences in economy, we've never had something that impacted quite in the way that it is impacting right now, and all of that is true. But there also have always been pandemics, right? There have been times where sickness has ravaged the planet. So it's not to equate those things, but it's to say that that we can go back and we can consider what did it mean that there have been times where sickness has unraveled structures that we thought were secure and we thought were sound. So that's number one. Number two is, you know, okay, so what can you do? What can you do? What can you do? And, you know, part of the tradition within Black American culture has been the idea of congregational movement. So there's also the sense always that you're not going to do anything alone in isolation. So a good step is to begin by checking in. And I think this has been one of the things that's so beautiful about this moment of great challenge and terror, is watching the ways that people have reached out to one another. This is one example, right? People are, you know, gathering together to spend time. But every day I'm aware more and more of the different networks that are sort of growing out from individuals who are saying, I need to connect with loved ones. I need to connect with community. I need to figure out a way to take the concerns, the political concerns, the creative concerns, the interpersonal concerns that I have, and figure out how to deploy them in a time where we can't physically gather with one another in the ways that we might normally do. So there's this sense of like, how can I take the limits of the circumstance in which I find myself, and inside of those limits, figure out how to make something, right? So this goes back to those survival strategies. You know, I was saying the other day that like, we always have figured out, like, from whether it's a rent party or a march or something, like you figure out how you're going to do with what you have. If all you have in the kitchen is some rice, which we may not have because people took all the rice from the store, you know what I mean? But if you have some rice and you have some beans, how do you cook that rice? How do you cook those beans? And how do you have a rent party? How do you open your door and you bring people in and you sell your tickets so you make your rent? And, you know, the old thing from the Harlem Renaissance of bathtub gin, right? Like that whole idea. What are the things we can offer right now? It forces us to reckon with what the core creative impulse. What are we really trying to do? And if we're trying to connect with one another's imagination and trying to connect with community and trying to meet together in the realm of an idea or the realm of an emotion or the realm of an urge toward unfolding or becoming, that's something we can do, but we can't do it like we used to do it because right now that thing has been interrupted by this disaster, right? So, and then the third thing, you know, and this is probably the more tricky thing, which hopefully we can unpack, and it really is tricky, is you have to feel your feelings. And this is the thing that, you know, in the work with Jomama, like this again and again comes up with her, is that urge from her to do that. If we don't feel what we're feeling, we're not going to be able to do anything. We're not going to be able to get anywhere. And that means at this moment, feeling your fear, feeling our grief, feeling our anger, feeling our confusion, and feeling our hope too, that there will be some outcome that is generative. The hope, for some people, it's a hope that we will get back to business. That's not my hope, but it is a hope that some people have. For other people, it's a hope that this will lead to a radical transformation of the society. For some people, it's a hope that the people that they love and they themselves won't perish in this experience. There's a lot of hope. And so you don't even want to touch it because it's so charged with uncertainty, almost like not wanting to jinx something, right? Like, don't let me go down that road because, right? But what happens inside, if you don't feel what you're feeling, you don't allow it to move, it gets stuck. And when things get stuck, it's bad business. And in some ways, that's part of what we're facing right now. I think a reckoning are the places where things got calcified, the places where things got stuck structurally, and stuck even imaginatively. All of that's been laid bare by this disaster.
So are there, in a practical sense, if you feel comfortable sharing it, what might that look like for you on a daily basis to say, today I'm feeling this moment, what do I do with it? I'm actually just feeling stuck or depressed or anxiety or hope. I'm feeling a lot of hope today, or today just feels good. I got a good walk in today. What are you doing in a way to kind of tap into some of that stuff for yourself?
Well, part of that is practice. What are your practices, right? Like, so for me, I'm somebody that, I think anybody who knows me knows there's a lot of people in here. It's a lot of people in here. So part of my thing is taking stock of, and that takes the form of a check-in with, like a meditation. And I'm very, I don't want to put any language, because I think there's a way that this concept of meditation and mindfulness has been like, absorbed by Western culture in a way that's really kind of dodgy. But what I will say is that there's nothing more simple than sitting your behind down for a moment in the morning and just checking in and saying, who's here today? What's going on today? Where am, like, what's the loudest voice in me today? What are the things that were prominent yesterday that have receded? What is the check-in with the body? I think about all of my great teachers who would not start anything before you sat yourself on the ground and you were breathing and you checked in with your body. It's amazing how little that happens for so many people I know and love. Like, it's up and at it, right? And even in the context of being in a kind of, this moment of staying in place, it can oddly cause you to be even more distanced from your body, even if your body's the only body that you're around, or like 3 or 4 bodies in your home. But doing that check-in and saying, oh, there's always going to be a relationship between a numbness or a tightness or a discomfort and something that's going on emotionally in our psyche. There's always a connection there. So that process. So who's here? What's loud? What's soft? What's going on with the body? And then what are the things, again, what can I do? What are the things I can do to make sure that I'm nourishing myself, getting enough water, getting to go for a walk or get some air. But then figuring out what am I going to bring into my consciousness. And so that does involve, like, am I going to start by going to a piece of reading, some incredible colleagues, friends of mine. One is a brilliant writer, Cord Arrington Tuttle, and Cord will post every day poetry that they read or poetry that they write, as a kind of haiku practice or a short form poetry practice, to make it regular. And not and this is a thing to say, like, kind of not to perform that you're doing it, you know, because ain't nobody there to see you perform it. And the people you know and love are gonna be like, oh, there you over there with that book again. But to do it in a sense, really for your the edification of your own spirit. What is a thing that you can touch? You know, Alexis Pauline Gumb's beautiful work comes to mind, and that she often does these oracular readings from her text that she's written. The idea that you can take a book, open it up, and whatever you open it up to will have information for you on that day. Trusting that you're going to be able, again, I said we're meaning makers. We know how to spin meaning. We're able to find the way to anchor what we're feeling to something that comes from the outside, like a seemingly random piece of text. It'll be a way to start that conversation. And in the process of feeling what I'm feeling too, Jeremy, I think, you know, it's very important to honor the fact that, you know, what I'm feeling is what I'm feeling. It's not what anyone else is feeling. Right. And what I want to do is make sure that I leave space also for all the people I come into contact with to be feeling what they're feeling, right? And not to try to impose my thing on them, and also not to absorb what they're feeling as my own, but to understand that meeting place. And I think about that in light of what's happening right now. You know, I'm in a very privileged position that I have a roof over my head, that I have food, that I have, you know, the ability to ride out this portion of this experience. And that is not true for not a good number, but a large percentage of our nation. And when I think beyond that, I think about, you know, for those folks on this call, and I'm curious when we get to the questions or the, you know, places where we can share. I can imagine that the weight of this, and I can understand that the weight of this is so profound because we now know that this disaster is going to undo so many of the ways that we have done what we do. And so to touch that thing can feel like touching that third rail, like it's so big, because it's not only about like, am I going to write today? Or am I going to keep writing a play that I was working on for the next month? Or, you know, can I be disciplined about doing my research for the thing? It's will we gather again? And when will we gather again? And if we gather again, where will we gather? And so it can spiral out. And maybe what I'm saying to you with regard to that is, I think it's very important in whatever way that each individual can do, not to try to wall off that feeling of fear and despair and uncertainty, but to try to find the way to dance with it. And I'm going to go back to that chapter that I read, that there's this idea of medicine in the crisis, that there is inevitably something in the place where we feel most vulnerable, most afraid, most undone, that is the mechanism by which change occurs. And one can choose to engage that consciously. And I'm not saying it's easy, and it is not at all, but it is a necessary work. And that is what I go back when I talk about my traditions. You know, the sounds that came out of the culture, the shapes that came out of the culture were born of what would be to us unimaginable loss and contradiction and pain. And it birthed medicine that helps sustain us, right? So I go back to that history to say people have been not here before, but they've been in circumstances before where everything started to come undone, and where unimaginable loss visited, boom, from the sky. And out of that comes something that sustains human beings. I hope that was practical enough, because, you know, my love.
I think I've been in a lot of conversations recently. Thank you for that. That was incredible. I've been in a lot, I'm trying to stick with it. I've been in a lot of conversations recently with writers in particular who have said, you know, at its best, and I'm paraphrasing and generalizing, but at its best, the relationships between freelance artists, between playwrights in a particular case, and a producing organization is tricky. It's tenuous. It's already based on a series of algorithms that who knows and changes and shifts from relationship to relationship. As I think about writing forward into the world, and I'm trying to be brave, and I'm trying to think through this, and I'm trying to like give myself space, but then should I be writing? I'm like trying to understand what I'm writing towards. And I think part of that infrastructure that's in place says you write a thing, then this happens, then this happens, then that happens in the best possible sense. And I'm wondering, I guess, what your thoughts are for writers, for generative artists in particular, for all artists who are thinking about creating work right now. If we were to, you know, knowing the uncertainty of what we don't know yet about how different institutions will exist and behave and relate to writers and artists going forward. What are your thoughts about making work right now? What are you thinking and feeling about? Should I still be making work? And it's a hard, deep, kind of like uncomfortable question. I think that I'm maybe asking
It's a
because
good.
it's very different for very different people. It's also like really depressing in certain ways to just to wrestle with it, but I also think it's real, and it's also only today. It's not tomorrow. It's not the next day. We're only in today. But I'm wondering how you wrestle or think about that today.
It's a very important question, and again, this is a place where I would underscore 1,000 times that my answer is my answer. It is not anyone else's answer. So I don't offer the answer. I don't offer my response to you as a dictum. I offer it as a way to say, here are some things that help me move through. I long ago disabused myself of the notion that art and capitalism make a good couple, right? So there is a way in which making work for a kind of achievement-based and production-based, object-based way of thinking was in direct contradiction to how I could be on the planet. So, you know, I mentioned this thing of 26 years since coming to the Playwrights Center. You know, a very small percentage of that time has been spent in that relationship that you're describing to making work, right? So for me, I couldn't be if I weren't creating. Again, the vast majority of the things that I've created have never entered that quote unquote pipeline, right? And that is a very different way than a lot of people and a lot of people that I know and love. So it's not a read on them. It is for me to say that making a thing was not contingent on whether or not it would enter that thing, that pipeline, and go result in a particular outcome. That said, I think this is one of those moments of deep reckoning where the you know, part of what gets laid bare, and I'm gonna go in here, is this idea that we think about as American exceptionalism. You know, that not only are we going to be okay, but that somewhere deep down in the heart of an individual, you can believe that you will be the exception to the rule, right? And that plays out in a number of different ways, and it's conditioned since so early. But I think it's important to lay bare, not for to shame it, but to look at it for yourself. What is that ambition that you have for your work, and what is it grounded in? And is it that you want to go on that trajectory to be the one that does the thing and gets the, or is it that you are trying to do what we talked about with this, which is to offer something from your experience to the human community? Cute. If you're trying to make your living, that's whatever. If you're trying to have a sustainable long-term career, that's whatever. It's like, okay, that's sweet and all. But I think if you're tapping into the core value, and this I see again and again and again in every walk of life that I've been in, if you are genuinely moving from your core value, you begin to perceive things in the world that are opportunities to align with those core values, and then to move in the world and create from and through those core values. So in my case, the productions that I've been able to have, the opportunities that I've been able to have, the reward from any outside source that I've received has been in direct connection to the core values that I have, which are about relationship and community, and trying to tell, share these ideas. And all of them came because of long, deep, abiding connection to other human beings. So I've been very fortunate, but I've been fortunate not because I was ambitious. I've been fortunate because I feel like I've been clear about wanting relationships to be centered. And I think, and this is just my provocation, I think in this time, when all of this other stuff gets laid bare, what's going to be visible are the relationships you have or you don't have.
Amen.
That's what's going to be visible. And I would say to that end that I trust the ingenuity, the resilience, the life force of creative artists and creative producers and creative institution builders. I trust our capacity collectively to reimagine a way. If that is true, it's going to be more important than ever that we center those real relationships that we have and be willing, and this is part of the good thing about coming up. We were joking about coming up when we did, right? And I'm thinking about that, the communities, and being kind of, that basically coming out of a working class, lower middle class, lower class, like that milieu. Everybody got to do their part, and their part is not only going to be about like, I'm gonna come here, here's my play, but like, how am I going to be on cleanup duty? How am I going to cook the food? How am I going to like listen to your story, not be the one to always tell the story? There's a certain shift of mindset to reimagining what it means to be part of a collective endeavor. And I think that's, again, a kind of medicine for this moment. And it's not comfortable. And this is part of the grief thing that I talked about the morning. And it can be intense to admit that you feel grief because you lost an opportunity. And I've seen so much beautiful, beautiful, beautiful support for all of the incredible artists whose productions have vanished this spring. And it's important to feel grief. If you've lost a thing, you should grieve it. You should grieve it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually an important part of that, because then it allows you to move. Even though you're going to carry that with you in some way always, it allows you to move, and it allows you potentially to reimagine how that work might happen in the world,
So that's interesting, because as you were talking about a moment ago, that stuff, when we don't work through it, it gets stuck, it gets calcified over time. And that is the stuff that will, like, when we're then making our decisions 6 months from now, or 3 months from now, or a year from now, we sort of end up still making those trauma-based decisions, because that stuff is still, like, it's still got the scar tissue there that you haven't kind of moved through,
Yeah, I got to go to another little quote. So I'm going to talk from Eleanor Roosevelt. Okay, so this is from the collection of her writing. There's like a million collections of her writing, but she's somebody I always go back to. And this is from a collection called Tomorrow Is Now, which is a selection of columns and essays that she wrote over the years. But in this, she's sort of talking, this chapter is entitled America the Unready, which, you know, come on. Yeah. But let me just read a few things from here. Why are we now afraid to change? How can we regain our sense of boldness in the face of danger, of imagination to create new solutions, of courage and high-heartedness in carrying them out? It is obvious that if we keep turning back, we'll never move forward, and the new world will leave us behind. The arch conservatives want a shrinking and not an expanding America with its sphere of influence ending at its own doorstep. And yet it must be plain that our world leadership may go by default if we practice non-intervention. She starts talking about communism. This is sort of like, you know, post-war. But this is the thing. In a sense, nearly all great civilizations that perished did so because they had crystallized, because they were incapable of adapting themselves to new conditions, new methods, new points of view. It is as though people would literally rather die than change. Mm-hmm. Boom. So there's something, again, about connecting to the fact that this is, there, in some ways, there's an historical waveform moving through all the time. It's a current. Again, it is not specific to the exact time that we're in, and there are things that are inimitable and, you know, about this place. But that resistance to change, and here's the thing: if we're flashback 6 months and talk to the arts communities, the complaints would largely be about the fact that things were calcified. There was not a way to, there's no way for things to move. Priorities are misplaced. Resources are misallocated. Like I can tell you just the things I collect every day from the people who would talk to me, from my students on through, you know, veteran artists. And here we are where all of that has been laid bare. Mm-hmm. It's been laid bare. So to quote my beloved former mentor, Dr. Constance Berkeley, what are you gonna do? Like, what are we right now going to do?
I'm going to use that provocation. Thank you, Dr. Berkeley. I'm going to use that provocation to say that why don't we imagine that if you have some questions or thoughts that you'd like Daniel to speak to, that maybe, again, if you scroll down to the bottom, your Q&A, if you want to pop something in there, I'll go ahead and share it out with Daniel in a minute or so. We do that. Daniel, I think I want to stick here as folks are kind of writing in their stuff for just 1 second to say, you were talking a moment ago about, this is, by the way, like the exact conversation that I wanted to have without being able to articulate it. And I knew I had to, that was it. I was like, I want to plan this conversation, but no, we have to trust. Thank God for you. It'll come. And it is about falling away. It is about letting the things that ought to go fall away, to grieve them, and the way through is through. But you talked a moment ago about sort of talking about collective a little bit, and as we're sort of gathering a couple questions and thoughts here, I'm wondering if you might speak a little bit to this idea of like, so you're an artist, you're kind of ideal for this moment in time, as you talked about, we're meaning makers, we're storytellers, we're all of that. I guess I just want to make sure that, well, I'm curious for you to share what you think the role of artists are right now. And I mean that sort of generally speaking, but I guess I also mean it specifically. Like we were in another conversation with some of the folks who were on here today, and we were saying, I don't know, drop your local theater an email and say, hi, I'm here, I'm in my home. How are you doing? Mm-hmm. What do you need? Is there space? Is there room? Is there stuff that you need? Is there anything I can do for you right now? What are ways that artists can be? We say create, and partially that's potentially internal. Is there a what is that collective? What is that community? What does that mean right now? Do you
Absolutely. No, the other thing I talked about being kind of a trans-temporal thinker, but I'm also a systems thinker. Like I'm like, how do these things link together, right? And so what our practices are. There's the form that something takes, right? Which is sort of like the manifestation of an impulse, or an utterance is a manifestation of an impulse. But go trace from the utterance back to the impulse. What is the impulse itself about? And that's what I'm saying. We make meaning. We're storytellers. We're people who are interested, in bringing together different human beings with radically different points of view to collaborate with one another and make a thing that's impossible that happens, and then it goes away, and we wire up lights, and we saw things, and we and we are dramatic, all give each other notes and things like that. All of those things are utterances of a deeper impulse. So we think about the play and the production being the utterance, but being a stage manager is an utterance of an impulse. Being a playwright is an utterance of an impulse. Being a director is an utterance of an impulse. Go back to the impulse and ask, how can my impulse serve my community? So if you're a bomb-ass director, what does that mean? It means that you're able to look at multiple systems moving at the same time and figure out how to bring them into congruence so that they can be their optimal shape, so that what's going to happen on a given night of performance is going to be able to flow. So how can that be useful in the soup kitchen? How can that be useful in figuring out how to get a team of people together to go shop for elders and bring food to them? How can that be useful for helping some of these poor, beleaguered parents who have to suddenly be homeschoolers, to deal with their rowdy ass children? Like, how can you offer what you do in an utterance that has actually nothing to do with the theater per se, in addition to what you're talking about, which is to figure out within the arts community specifically how you might do what I love is there ain't nothing like it. The first, second, third day this lockdown hit some of the cities, and I shouldn't use lockdown because ain't nobody on lockdown, but this stay at home request. Boom, boom, boom. There were all of these artists who were like, well, we're going to do this. We're going to do this on Zoom. We're going to figure out, a listening series. We're going to figure out, all these different delivery mechanisms for art. So that part of it, I'm not so worried about. Like, I think that the way that people will continue to share, everybody singing the song from their living room. I'm doing them, like you've been having a conversation, posting things. Beautiful. There's going to be tons of online content. But I would challenge all of us to think about, how can I take this thing that I know how to do and flip it? So that's my answer to that. All right, we got questions.
Flip it and reverse it. All right, 5 questions so far. Here we go. Can you see them, Daniel?
I can. Should we just answer them?
Yeah, do you want to read them so that folks can, because I think only you and I can see them.
Christina Jamie wrote, howdy, after inspiration hits, what is your process like when writing a new piece of work? Invariably, when inspiration comes, I then start to gather. So it's a gathering, research, little bits of, if I know anything that is clear, like there's going to be a particular persona, character, it's a setting, just start to make material versions of it, writing things down, gathering them in a folder. But it's a gathering process, because I've always worked as an assemblage artist. Like I bring things together and shape them and reshape them and reshape them until a meaning comes. But so gathering is the big thing. Gustavo, how would you tie in, the chapter and the practice of becoming the snake with congregational movement? So interestingly, I've been doing some research for my new piece, which is called Altar Number 5. And I was in New Orleans for a while, and I was reading a lot about the Damballa and the snake and the role that it is always played in African diasporic religious traditions. And what's interesting is that there's always a sense of gathering
to support the process of shedding that skin, right? Gathering to support the process of raising the energy of whether we call it life force, kundalini, whatever you want to, like what gets brought up together, that you don't do that in isolation, you do it in community. And so part of what I would say is that the tying in is like, how do you bring, you know, thinking about congregational singing, not only as creative output that we're doing something that is participated in by a group, but also congregational singing as the sound of what it means to come together with your loved ones, the sound of what it means to come together in community and to say, I woke up this morning and I'm abjectly terrified. Help me move this today, right? I have a community of artists and friends who we check in every week, and we, you know, it's like a little, people preachify at each other, and it's like somebody, well, I'm gonna tell you this, and you stir it up. Don't try to do it alone. And if you've been one of those people that always has it together, and you know, like you never let anybody see, you know, you without your wig, now's the time to let it loose and ask people for help. So that's that, Gustavo. Jordan, all right. Let me say you, oh, we're preaching. All right. I teach a course called Young, Gifted, and Black, being an artist of color and navigating that theater world, where a lot of us are continuing to not be represented or are simply struggling to be seen and acknowledged. Thank you so much. So the first thing is to acknowledge that that's real. And I'm talking about that trans-temporal thing. It's always been, always. And that's not to say, like it's always been that way, oh, we can't do something about it, but it's always been that way. So what does that invite you to do? And so if, not being represented and not being acknowledged, by whom? Who's not acknowledging you? Who's not representing you? Because there are communities where you are seen, and there are communities where you are acknowledged, and there are communities where you are represented. And so part of it for me is to shift that the prow of the ship toward, it's kind of like go where you are loved. How does being in alignment with love and visibility shift something? I think about, there's so many incredible writers coming through right now who I just adore. And I'm thinking about like Alicia Harris, and, that she's unabashedly joyful in centering us. Like, this for us. What does it mean this for us? And that other people can come and they can see it, and they can be there. But we're going to put the focus on cultivating that love and that beauty. Ultimately, and I think this is true not only for Black artists, other folks of color, quote unquote, for queer artists, but I would actually argue is that like is some part of it is generational, but some part of it is also just like a shift in consciousness. These old systems, they were already dead. Like, they were already, it's like back, Jeremy, you remember like in the Saturday morning cartoons, there would always be some like cartoon villain that would be like a disembodied brain in a jar of, it's like the evil villain who decided they were going to keep on living at all costs. And so their brain was in like a vat of water, and they would come in and be like, we're going to take over the thing. It would come in, and that would be the villain. And that's kind of like what those, Jordan, those structures are to me, is that they've stayed alive through unnatural means. Like, they have continued, but this is again a moment of reckoning. And I would say, put your heart, your soul, your vibe, everything, all your brilliance into the spaces where you are loved, and then create spaces where you love, where you invite people in to see, and trust that right now. Trust that is rising. I'm thinking about D Nice and his Instagram live dance party. I want to be there. Make that version of theater where we all get to come and we all get to dance. All right, Donna, what makes you not think that many things in theater will simply resume, such a stale tradition? I'm glad for the change. You know, this is the thing I just said about the brain. There are always going to be people who keep the dead alive, and that, you know, that's always going to be the case. But I do think what's happening now is something's getting revealed. It's not being made right now, but it's being revealed that there have been all these other ways of doing and other ways of sharing work that are so vital, that because of the dominance in popular view of the old system, just haven't been as visible. But that's change. It's been changing, and it's so again, I would say for myself, and again, this is Daniel speaking. It's not like a big view. I'm that old model, and it stopped being interesting to me a long time ago. And
I had something there too, which is just about mediocrity for a quick second, which is, no, I'm adding to you what you're saying. I'm throwing in the idea of mediocrity, that part of I think what I feel like I'll talk with other artists or folks about is sort of like, oh, I don't know, like, do people really want to see it? I don't know. It was like half full in that theater, and no one really wants to be, you know, so sort of these like, what are the stories that are being told? How are stories being told? Just the whole idea of kind of what doesn't work anymore, kind of dawn a little bit to what you were using the word stale in your question, and I think it's a great word. And I just wonder if there is something about the stakes of this moment in time, that as we resume, whatever resume is, which is obviously not real, but it's sort of whatever the new version of coming back together is. I wonder if there is a different kind of urgency that people are going to feel about what they sort of insist on in their in how they congregate, how they exchange with one another. And I'm curious if that will also help inform what theater, at least in this country, can be or is or might look like, you know, in the future, kind of going forward, at least partially.
Completely. And I would emphasize heterogeneity rather than homogeneity, like to keep emphasizing that there are multiple ways of doing this that are distinct from one another, that may have congruence in like there's a conversation among them, but they're not all trying to do it the same way, you know? So, you know, when I think of so many of the extraordinary artists that are out here making, you know, there's an invitation not only to make different things, but also to make in different ways, you know? Harun Ali's beautiful, like, bedrock work of building awareness and community and a kind of culture of inquiry in the pieces that they create. You know, Jordan E. Cooper's, like, you know, commitment to disruption. Like, we can just start naming these artists who are like killing it by changing, and that means it's like it's a field, truly a field of wildflowers versus like that the farm where it's the same tulips, you know? All right, why not look at what this is Donna D. Gordon. Why not look at what this pause means to everyone in our society? As writers, we can sure learn from that. Very much enjoy the ideas here. Ashe, that's right. Bridget Kim, does anything ever bog and block your personal creative energies to the point where you don't want to create? How do you snake that drain? I love that. That's a great question.
There. How do you snake that drain?
Yeah, for sure. And so again, it's that thing I talked about checking in every day and being like, you know what, today is not working. And so I try to, there was a great little thing going around. Did you see it, Jeremy, of the astrological signs in confinement? Like, you know, each one, like Cancer was Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction, like looking in the corner like this. And then Aquarius, which is one of, you know, I was Liza Minnelli, like looking off and singing, you know, a song about being alone and the drama. And so, Bridget, if I'm feeling stuck, I try to go all the way in and just be like, feel all of that and just be like, I'll never write again. Like, throw myself on the floor, go in seriously and say, you know, this doesn't mean anything. It's not gonna help people. I'm stuck, I'm worthless. Go all the way in. And then when you're tired, get up and come back and work. Sarah Oh, okay. Amara Brady, I'm hungry.
Sarah, no, do Sarah. She just moved up. Okay.
Oh, she moved up. Okay, I thought you went away. Okay, Sarah, any further recommended reading, texts that are important to your practice? Anything has to do with change. So I'm gonna emphasize, I want everybody to get this book. I love it. It's Awakening Osiris, Normandy Ellis. I also, I've been going back to the Tao to read that. And then the other book that I chose today, I really recommend anything like writings by Eleanor Roosevelt for sure. And then the essayist who I always go back to, and I feel like she is in certain circles criminally undersung as an essayist, is Alice Walker. And I feel that her ability to offer practical ways of moving in life with the contradictions that we face is extraordinary. And the body of work that she has created, and she has many books of essays that I would just say, like, if you haven't availed yourself of Alice Walker as an essayist, please do. Amara, I'm hungry to imagine the world after this and how things are going to shift. Any tips on how to help yourself imagine the world? Do it. Make that part of your practice. Spend 10 minutes a day being in that new world. What is the light like? What is the air like? Who's around you? What are we doing? What are we feeling? It is extraordinary to look at, and it's nefarious, the whole political conversation that we're in, obviously. But if you look at this, again, go back not even 6 months, 3 months, and then tell me that we would have had this stimulus bill come through with people overnight, all that resource unlocked. So it's possible for all that resource to be unlocked, and we've only seen the tip of the iceberg of what that is. It's possible. So imagine what that thing is like. Make it a practice to imagine it every day, and maybe make it a practice to interact with somebody as though it were there already. See what that would do to you. What would it liberate in you to speak from a place where you have everything you need and you know that the person who you're speaking to has everything that they need? What would that feel like? Because if you start to feel what that is, that becomes a kind of magnetism. It's real. Samya, okay, I'm a queer woman of color playwright who has been searching for more queer women of color playwrights, theater makers, forms of theater. Are there any things you can recommend to read, see, look at? Anything that speaks to first gen or second gen in the US would be greatly appreciated. This is extraordinary. I'm gonna give you 2 names. The first is, I want you to check in with my beloved friend Sharon Bridgeforth. She has a podcast called Who Yo People Is. It's available on any of the places where that are podcast aggregators, like iTunes or Spot. It's on Spotify as well. And the first season of her she's had 2 seasons. The first season is entirely dedicated to young POC queer artists, some of whom are first gen or second gen. And so that's a place where you get to go and meet a ton of artists, and then from there spoke out and see, learn more about their work. And I never listened to that. I was fortunate enough to be a guest on the 2nd season. I was like, you have to do old people because I won't be on there. But go and listen, because every time I listen to them, my mind is blown, and I also feel like I'm introduced to a whole new beautiful constellation of folks. Chris Portley, afternoon. What ways do you think we as artists can, as you say, flip it and help people who aren't as involved within the artistic community or who aren't artists? Yeah, so part of it is who are the people that you're connected to in your daily life who are not artists, and how can you start to offer what you do in support to them directly? Number 1. And number 2, and this is part of the thing that's challenging about us having to shelter in place, right? Because we can't just kind of go out. But are there local services, wherever you are, that are doing things. And I know that there are, like, where people are doing volunteer work, and to figure out how you can connect, and maybe to start by doing what they're doing already. But then as you're entering, you know, so for example, if there are, I know a number of places that are doing shopping for elders, right? Like, people are doing that. People are doing that in a very organic way. Like, if they live in a building in New York City or in the neighborhood, going and saying, like, I'm going to do this. I'm happy to go do this. But what are the if you're involved, how do you start by doing that, but then transition into saying, here's something else I can offer? And then finally, I would say, make something that you can give. Is there a webinar, a piece of writing that you can offer, a set of instructions, something that you can offer to share widely that takes into consideration you're offering it to people who are not artists? And again, I mentioned one of the things that a lot of the homeschooling parents right now are desperate, and I mean desperate, for content to work with their kids. So if there's any aptitude that you have that is arts proximate, but not about art, like if you know how to teach some math, or like, you know, do some science experiment, and you can make something in an artful way that you can offer as a tool, free of charge, that you can upload on YouTube or Instagram or something like that, that's another way to do it, just in the short term. All right, Yanka. Hey, Daniel, I'm struggling with feeling like my theater art has meaning and value in the face of the current disruptions. I find myself constantly feeling like I have to keep doing and working when my inner knowing is just telling me to rest. What are some ways to break the spells of hyperproductivity? Yeah, this is a
beautiful question. My God, that's it right there.
Yeah, you know, part of it is, you know, again, that thing of ain't nothing to it but to do it. Like, lay yourself down. And again, part of it, let those feelings move through you. And they're not going to move through you when you're done. They're going to be, it's a constant flow of those feelings of doubt, and those feelings of futility, and those feelings of resistance to doing. We both come from that, like, Western Massachusetts, New England. Like, I got that Puritan. My grandma, like, to this day, I hear her voice when I get out of the bed and I haven't made my bed, and I haven't, you know, like, what are you doing in the idle hands of the devil's workshop? So, like, it is inculcated in me, work, and work is value, and, you know, idle hands of the devil's workshop, all of that kind of energy, combined with, again, the sense that if you're not constantly adding to material to the machine, you are not valuable. If the latest thing you're doing is not visible, you're not valuable. So part of what's going to have to happen, I think, for the culture at large, is to say, I'm told I'm not valuable if I'm not working. Mm-hmm. Let me be not valuable in the eyes of the culture. Let me do that. Let me be not valuable. And what you'll find, I suspect, is that you are then brought into a deep relationship with interrogating what value is. And, you know, the idea that you can move at a different time signature. This is why I love listening to jazz. Miles Davis would not play a note until he was ready to play that note. And maybe sometimes not even then. He would keep that note for himself. And Abby Lincoln would sing way behind the beat. She'd be like, I'm gonna sing that phrase when I'm ready. Y'all can play, and I'll be there when I need to be, because guess what? When I do sing, people are gonna be listening to me, right? So trusting that you can move in your own time signature, and that you said this was something that came through, you know, through your own inner knowing. That's your genius and your boldness and your wisdom. So trust that. Jordan asks, how do you handle rejection or criticism of your work? Lord, today. Yes. Well, you know, I think I can say, you know, that I'm not alone as an artist. I think we all face rejection, right? But I feel like that's been the vast majority. Like, people have always been like, no, not that, not you. You're not the one. You know, and especially in my own journey as a Black artist, queer artist, whatever. Even within those communities, the Black artists ain't trying to, and the queer artist, it's like I've been constantly rejected. And so it was a really, in the end, really important medicine. I come back to that word medicine because I'm like, well, what am I trying to be accepted into? And criticism, you know, another one of my great mentors, Dr. Blanche Forman, would always say when, you know, she was a grand lady, a Black opera singer from Norfolk, Virginia. And whenever anybody would criticize, and you know, you come to her in her office hours, whatever, be like, they said this, they said that, and she'd be like, she would sit with you and she'd be like, they used to call me Danny. She'd be like, Danny, consider your source, i.e., who's criticizing you? And, you know, do you like their wig? Do you like the way they walk through the world? Like, what does that mean? You know, criticism, response to your work that comes from people who are invested either in your work or invested in the conversation that you're having is incredibly valuable. And it is a place to understand how, as Toni Morrison said, your work meets the world. But beyond that, sing your song, do your work, and you'll find your people, which is what, for me, you know, I'm speaking again only for myself. I found my people, I found my community, and that was the gift. Thank you.
Questions answered. Daniel Alexander Jones.
What? They don't know. Can I read another?
Tell me what?
I want to read the last chapter I have from here, if that's cool. And this is hardcore. We're going in with this. All right, y'all ready? This is called Becoming the Crocodile. It's the second. It's right after Becoming the Snake. And you'll know the crocodile is the denizen of the river, right? And the crocodile is an intermediary between the world of the dead and the world of the living. The crocodile in ancient Egyptian cosmology, when your heart was weighed upon your death in the afterlife, if you didn't pass the test, your heart was thrown to the crocodile to eat. So the crocodile has all this symbolism. And also the crocodile is the familiar, the beloved animal of Oshun, who is the Yoruba Orisha of love and generative possibility. Becoming the crocodile. If you stand only on the safety of the banks, spearing fish, how can you know the depths of the river? Can you fathom the darkness under a ledge of rock or understand the life of the fish writhing on your spear? You mistake the teeth of the crocodile as the edge of the abyss, but the chasm is more terrible than teeth and more certain. I fulfill the law, and the law demands your blood. I am Sibak, the crocodile, the catastrophe, the devourer, the necessity. Impaled on my teeth, you shall be blessed, for you will glimpse truth. I am only the secrets of your own dark heart, your lust, your greed, your anger, your flesh. As long as you breathe, I shall exist to snatch you from yourself, to grind your bones and chew your flesh, to tear the darkness from your heart. I am the living power of water, the cry that catches in the throat, the sob that shatters stone. On my teeth, you smell the stink of flesh. To you, I seem a living horror. But I tell you in truth, I am your own soul, and it is with great sorrow that I crush the life you have made. I weep with the loss, but you do not believe. Such destruction is madness, you say. You do not understand. It is madness, is it madness to cut the wheat so that bread can be made? When you were born into this bright land, did you not weep for the lost dark of the womb? Whether or not you understand the law, you exist because of it. When you've reached the lips of the great devourer, you are staring into the jaws of creation. So I offer that in kind of conclusion or closing, because this is life and death we're in. And every day we read the names of those who have died, and we will continue to read names, and we will not read names of many who die because they won't be remembered to us publicly. But the people who love them will feel that grief, and they themselves will have had to face this terrible end. And there's, in the midst of our conversation about art and theater, I think it's super, super important to remember that we are losing people, not only from this, but we've been losing people from so many aspects of our society that are now, again, laid bare. So we have an invitation. It is a painful, uncomfortable, disorienting, and grief-producing invitation to visit with that crocodile, to visit with that energy of undoing, and to have to face death. And death not only of the people, but death of ways of being. And I go back to that thing, when you're born, you are leaving a thing that was your home. When you cut the wheat, that thing that was growing was beautiful, seems to be gone, but there is something else happening on the other side of it. There's life, there's bread, and there's going to be a new way that we are with one another. It's just not right now. And we shouldn't try to make it right now. We should be in this, because this is the medicine, and you can't get through the medicine quick, right? And someone asked if I could link the book. And so I'm gonna send Julia the names of the texts. Julia, is that possible? I'm calling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I popped it in for that individual, a link to the Goodreads page, but if you have more, I will be happy to email that out to everybody.
Yeah, I would love for us to share it with everyone, so people can avail themselves as they wish.
You got it.
Thank you.
We're coming to our close here, and I want to give people more time to rest, going back to our friend's idea of listening to rest. Yes, Sarah, thank you for your question. Once we have it recorded, with most of our programming, we're sending out an email after that just says, hey, thanks for joining us. Here's what else is up if you feel like joining us. And so specifically, we will make sure we figure out where we release the recording of that when it's happening as well, too. Daniel, thank you for spending time today with us. You do what you do, and it is the balm that I think a lot of us are kind of looking for right now. And I think that combination of just understanding our world and ourselves within the context of the world is really helpful, both in practical terms and also just some spiritual terms. And it really means a lot that you're choosing to spend your time doing this right now. I think so many of these questions that we were asking, so many of the questions that came up today were, what can I be doing? Well, here you are. You're one person. You're an artist. And thank you for choosing to share out to all of us. And I'm hoping when we share this out further, more people will receive some of that healing that you've shared with us today. I really appreciate you sharing your heart and spirit with us so fully today.
Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, I mean, we're all in this together. And so, you know, my prayer for everyone is that we be able, as best we can, to meet this experience with the truth of our intention. And it's the piece that I've been working on was already touching a lot of these themes before this happened. And so, you know, I would just say to folks, if you want to keep in conversation with some of these ideas, I'll be sharing the ways that that project Altar Number 5 is going to kind of meet the world. And my intention is to make the as much, if not all of it, as I possibly can, something that people can just access super easily from a number of different avenues. Because I want to try to continue to keep offering what I can. You know, it was interesting. You know, I just turned 50 in February, and I was thinking about what does it mean to be at a point where there are, you know, I'm not an elder per se, but I think there are some things that I now know from journeying that I can offer. And so it feels really good to be able to take this energy and offer it in some way at this time. And so if it's useful, I'm grateful. And if not, bin it, you know, and keep going. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us all today. Thank you all so much for being with us today. We really appreciate you spending time with us. Please check out the rest of the programming that we've got going on at pwcenter.org and find out other ways that you can participate. We appreciate you all. We are sending much love and health, and please know that we're here, so feel free to reach out to us.